Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Before proceeding, there was just one final thing that I wanted to ask you. Could you please give us an example of the Zuhd of the companions? A strong example that shows you how their Zuhd was.
I'd say one standout example.
Mhm.
Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. I would say one standout example would be that of Ashab al-Saffa,
Mhm.
who are again a group of people that have had their legacy corrupted. Who Imam Salih Ash-Shami, Hafidhullah, actually did a book on them to
MashaAllah.
clear the doubts regarding the companions of the bench or the companions of the veranda.
SubhanAllah.
And these were the companions. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu was amongst them.
Allahu Akbar.
And he suffered great hardships, but persevered. There were times that he did not have food. In fact, the miracle of the milk, which lasted for all the companions, he was the one that was carrying the container of milk who witnessed this miracle among the other companions. So he is amongst these people that witnessed it. His zuhd and abstention, because when he first was given the milk as a gift, he said, I was so thirsty and racked with hunger that I thought, why don't I just drink it? But then I remembered my obedience to Allah and His Messenger, and I abstained and carried the gift until I reached Him. So these are people that are actually in a state of deep need. But in spite of that, they discharge their obligations to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why the story of Abu Hurairah and the container of milk is such a powerful reminder to us. And it's why that one was chosen by Abu Bakr ibn Dawood al-Salihi as one of the ending statements under his book of Ahadith al-Diyafa, the Ahadith on hospitality, is really powerful.
Yes.
Because although someone might be in a time of need, to resist yourself, to deprive yourself, to engage in what are known as privations, where you say no to yourself in order to sacrifice for a greater good. That is the way of the people of Zuhd and Ihsan, is committing these privations.
Subhanallah, mashallah, jazakallah khairan. I would like to now move to a new subject, and this is in regards to the Sheikh-centered turuq. So you've explained us this whole methodology of the first three generations and how the Hanabila until today have followed this. But could you tell us when these Sheikh-centered turuq came to be? I want to talk about the Shadhiliyya, the Naqshbandiyya, and the Suhrawardiyya. Now, this was slightly different than following this whole methodology that we just described. Could you tell us what kind of turuq these were when we talk about Sheikh-centered turuq and their beginning?
Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. When we discuss these Sheikh-centered turuq, this goes back to the original discussion about patience and sobriety. What was the case is that the original elders taught you the affairs of your religion of the four rings. It might be one sheikh that teaches you these four rings, it might be several, but they have themselves had a foothold in these four rings: mastery or intermediate strength. And that the goal was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in which you were engaged in worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nafal, dhikr, wird, sama' gatherings, qira'ah, all different matter of praiseworthy worship. You were engaged in this. With the rise of other turuq, and again, it's the same thing we had with the creed, that all of them claim that, oh yes, we are following the exact same recipe as Shaykh Abdul Qadir Al-Jilani rahimahullah. It's the same thing over and over again. What happened was, the idea of these turuq, these lesser turuq, had been to create a structure in which the student, called the murid, would emulate his teacher.
Mhm.
And because his teacher was at the level of these people of righteousness and goodness, he could take his teacher as a role model and he could implement what his teacher gave. And this carried on for a period of time. But as is so often the case, when you create hierarchies of individuals, not a body of people,
Mhm.
but a hierarchy where there's one individual centralized over an entire structure that's not a prophet, the possibility for something creeping in becomes greater.
All right.
And so then you had the rise of the specialized wazifa and wirds,
Mhm.
where you have to read this, or you should read this, or you must read this, or don't do azkar with them because you don't have permission to do azkar with them. Do azkar with us.
Mhm.
No, don't join them, join us. No, their sheikhs, not their sheikhs, our sheikhs.
Mhm.
Now, the original methodology was, and this, some people attribute this to Imam al-Ghazali, so let's say that it is. There were those who had reached the highest levels of ihsan, but were incapable of putting it into words.
Wow.
So these people, once in the fana of Allah, where their acts and their duties and their behavior, it remained only with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they could not put it into words. It was incapable of being described. These people, once gone, were gone. They were in al-hayatul dunya, but they were gone.
Mhm.
Patience and sobriety was the representation of those who had been at the highest levels, then they had come back,
Mhm.
or the others. They put into words what happened to them and explained how others could traverse the same path,
Mhm.
which is Shaykh Al-Jilani and others like this. Those in hal and wedged, or whatever words they want to call it, were incapable of expressing in words what had happened to them
Mhm.
in order to guide people to that next level. And that's why they didn't have permission or put this into words. As Imam Mustafa Ashati rahimahullah mentioned, that Ibn Arabi, great as he was, did not put into words an exact methodology of what happened, what he went through, because he was in these states, and that's not the sought after methodology. So when we reach this issue, you have a sheikh who would be the murshid that would watch over his followers, that would be in that state,
Mhm.
and they would use the hal or the wedged as a means of measurement of the particular person's having reached his state of excellence.
Mhm.
Sometimes they would do things such as isolation, where they would put you into khalwa mandatorily for 40 days and 40 nights. So they would tell you, you have to not do these things for 40 days, avoid this for 40 days, or do these actions for 40 days. And if you miss this, then you have to start again. They do similar things like this, which are not impermissible, but they're not sunan either. They're not impermissible, but they're not sunan either. And the assumption that because other people met with success and the same results is the equivalent of assuming that because Nabiyuna Yunus alayhi salam said, Subhanakallahumma inni kuntu min al-zalimin, or words similar to this one in the belly of the whale, that if you turn the lights off in complete darkness, or if you actually go into the whale yourself and repeat these words, that you will achieve the same things that he achieved. We know that this is not correct. One person having success with this has nothing to do with the other having success with it. But nonetheless, people attempted to reproduce the results that some of these sheikhs, some of these sheikhs produced. Sometimes it was the sheikhs themselves that had produced these results through an independent witness that they had where they had done something unique and somehow had reached a certain level or had been given some unveiling. And so they thought that the rest of those around them were able to do the same thing. And so it created these ossified, calcified movements in which they insisted that you had to read these formulaic adhkar,
Yes.
adhkar which are not found in the Sunan texts, not found in literature of the early generations or their students. It's not found. And that's not in and of itself impermissible. If someone made adhkar in a fashion in which it wasn't exactly said in the first three generations. But when you stipulate to people that they must, now it becomes an issue. If you had just merely said to someone, I found success in these adhkar that I do by myself, where I mention the names of Allah for an hour or what have you, and I found success, maybe you'll have success. That's different. But when you tell people you must, you will. I don't give you permission to do this zikr until I say this. I don't give you permission to go with, oh, no. They're Chishtis and we're Shadhilis. I don't give you permission to go. What is this?
So these shuyukh, they're learned ulama, but they put these methods that they were successful with into their tariqah, you may say.
Yes. And subsequent generations moving on from them took these things as their methodology and added to them. Now, as you know, when you add to something that can't be given range, because we said in every ilm of the Ulum Sharia, in every single ilm, there are people who they might transgress the bounds or do other things. And it's for the muhakkikeen, the researchers and latter day people of whatever science, to stop that from happening, to renew matters, and to stop doubtful and blameworthy matters from becoming the norm. But this continued on. And this is why now you will see people who engage in all a matter of ecstatic utterances, movement in dhikr, and any number of other affairs. And they assume that this is not only something that is noble to do, but that it belongs to the actual people that do so as well. People will engage in the use of live wind and string instruments, swaying back and forth, or dancing, or piercing themselves, driving themselves through with things, sometimes lighting fires and putting their hands in it and taking it back out and having not been burned because they said they're wedged, and any number of other things that they say, or speaking in strange languages or strange utterances and foaming at the mouth and collapsing. A lot of these states came to be, rather than being viewed as abnormal and things that are not sought, came to be seen as things that are sought. And so the majdhub has been thought, the one overwhelmed is seen as, oh yeah, this person, or the ashiq who has gone too far. These people, mashallah, that's the state to be in. And then this has been handed down to us. So you will have these problems of people, whether they're making tawaf around graves or giving bay'ah through a grave. I will give you one example in the United States on the West Coast. And I think this is important to state this. When the Salafi cult first came, there was a huge sweeping epidemic of people being affected by it. And after a period of time, it collapsed under its own weight because there was nothing substantive to it. It was a flavor of Islam, a surface, and icing on a cake that did not belong. And then it fell into utter and complete obscurity and degradation. I say to you, this current wave of Ashari Maturidi, Sufi versus Salafiyya, this will also collapse. And there will be a wave of apostasies that will come following this. Because it's a flavor for Islam. It's an icing. And there's nothing substantive behind it. I've said this before, brothers were of one accord. But then this started. And brothers began to cross-examine other brothers on why they don't have bay'ah and why they should have bay'ah and why you aren't involved with this person. If you don't have a bay'ah, then you die the death of jahiliyyah, even though that hadith in the Sahih of Muslim has nothing to do with bay'ahs to a tariqah. And that's not even applicable to that anymore. When Nawawi says this is talking about, it doesn't mean that you die kafir, but you die like people did in Jahiliyyah, in which they had no one to look after their properties and their items and their things. It's got nothing to do with this. And this is talking about when there's a legitimate khalifa or emir or a governor in your area and you refuse bay'ah and you rebel against him. That's what this is talking about.
And the bay'ah that they are supposedly referring to, obviously it's the tariqa bay'ah, but obviously this is from the Sheikh-centered later turuq.
Yes, this is a later affair, because people will often cite to you, well, look, Shaykh Abdul Qadir Al-Jilani, rahimahullah, he had a green khirqa, and people would take hold of it and they would come into, yes, that green khirqa was a barakah that he got from Abu Sa'd al-Mukharrimi that he would share with his other students, rahimahullah. But the bay'ah, there's no formulaic bay'ah, there's no statement. What people did to enter in is they took on those 4 rings and the methodology of ta'aleem, tahkeem, and tatbiq. That's what they were taking on. They didn't admit their sins to the sheikh. They didn't say, I hereby pledge my life to you. I hereby do. That was nothing to do with it. That wasn't said at all. So when this bay'ah structure comes in, and we witness it in the United States on the West Coast, brothers had been of one accord, and then they became divided. One such Muslim brother, he doesn't mind me using his name is Jibreel, married to a Muslim sister from South America, Colombia. She had reservations about joining this tariqah, but he had insisted, no, I'm going to join them. And so he gave this bay'ah, and what the bay'ah had entailed is that he should go into the location where they're taking initiates and intend 2 rak'ah for the sheikh. But this is major shirk, to intend something for anyone but Allah. On another occasion, Muslim brother, he is told that you must take everything that the sheikh gives you, everything. I've mentioned this before. And he's handed something on a paper plate from behind a curtain, and he eats it, and this turns out to be feces. He goes into toxic shock, and he winds up in the hospital. Now, someone may say to me, but Brother Abu Ja'far, you're quoting extreme examples. These are not all the examples. This is not true. Okay, then I'm going to cite other examples. What about the incidents that have been occurring? Orgies in the US, there's an entire organization for people that go online. There's an entire organization of people that have come together and formed a rights advocacy group. It's a groundswell of people that have come together to form an advocacy group against these turuq and sheikhs of light in the US. It's an entire organization.
People who have been abused then probably.
Yes, sexually abused, emotionally abused. Orgies where people were pushed into sexual escapades against their will when they were vulnerable. There's your turuq. Then we have the same thing in Jordan occurring. They're abusing people they had before, and they did, and to the degree that some people have even apostated. Then we have the same thing happening in Syria, where these same people are in bed with the Alawi government. And some of them act as agents and other things. These are not things that are just my statement. They're things that have been seen, that have been found, that can be known. Then we see the same things that happen in Libya, in northern Egypt. The same things are being shown in Morocco. The same things are being shown to us over and over again. So it's not one person, it's not one thing. It's not, oh, it's just a few bad out. No, it's most of the apples in the barrel are rotten. That's what it is. It's not the science of the soul. It's these sheikh-centered turuq, to where you go into their gatherings and people are doing movements or other things, and the sheikh is the center. He's in the
Yes.
center, officiating this like a conductor does a symphony orchestra.
And
But here's the thing. Someone came to Sheikh Sidi Muhammad Jamal, big alim Palestinian Hanbali sheikh. He died recently, rahimahullah. And I asked him, what should I do? Because they came into his Shadiliya, it's completely different. What should I do? And he said, what do you mean? They said, what should I envision when I make zikr? Because another thing people get told is tasawwur sheikh, which is a type of hypnosis.
Yeah.
So now when they're in their salah, when they're in the zikr, they're told that they've got to remember their sheikh, so he's always with them. And then you have the fabrications where people say that Shaykh Al-Jilani, if you envision him when you do a certain thing and you take 2 steps toward Baghdad, that when you're dead and the angel of death comes and you'll say, and he'll go away from you and the Shaykh Al-Jilani will protect you.
SubhanAllah.
Or someone was on a boat and there was a large rainstorm and they said, oh, Shaykh Al-Jilani, and he appeared and he was huge up until the sky, his body, and he stopped them and they calmed the storm. Listen. We don't pay that any mind. Because the karramat, as Ibn Rajab mentions, as well as Mu'afiddin Qudama mentioned, they are mutawatir. His karramat are mutawatir. We know them.
MashaAllah.
And they have been narrated by Imam At-Tazifi. They have been in his qala'id. They've been narrated in Tabaqat al-Hanabila.
MashaAllah.
We know what's been narrated. Anything outside of the people that knew him best, Mu'afiddin Qudama makes reference to him. Anyone outside of the people that knew him best has to be telling fantasies. As Abu Ja'far al-Udfuwi rightly rebuked Shantufi for the despicable fantasizing lies and mythology that he put together.
I think it's still out there today.
Well, it's still out there today. People use it as a source book. Some I'll say human being because they're disguised as human beings, but some creature disguised as a human being translated this thing and it's spread, and it's also been spread in other languages because Shaitan isn't just for the Arabs, he's against everyone.
Wow.
So this filth has spread. Now, when we look at this for what it is, and we understand it for what it is, this methodology has then spread. And lots of Muslim brothers were affected by this. And I witnessed it. And brothers had themselves divided from having been upon one accord. So brothers were upon one accord. The Salafiyah came, took 2 Muslim brothers that I was very close with, took them from them. Muslim brothers were of one accord. Sufi Ashari Maturidi versus Salafi thing, that came, took Muslim brothers from me. The Shiite thing came around the same time and took a Muslim brother from me. So I've witnessed, these aren't things that I'm speaking from where I just have it in for Sufis and Abu Ja'far, he despises Tasawwuf. No, I learned it. I studied it. We studied Ibn al-Jawzi's writings. We took readings from Sifat al-Safwa. Because of his proximity to the first 2 generations, Shaykh al-Jilani, we don't have this issue because we know that Tasawwuf is a science of the deen.
Yes.
What the dispute is, or what the contention is what's being passed off. And the great majority of what's being passed off is utter and complete drivel. And in the English-speaking world where Muslims reside, it's mostly drivel. And it's being done on purpose to stunt the growth of believers and stymie them from their knowledge, just like they stymie you in fiqh, just like they stymie you in i'tiqad, just like they stymie you in tajweed. These things are being done with brazen, unimaginable arrogance because they don't believe they can be caught or stopped. So my advice is to be mindful of these things, because the goal is not to be Mustafa al-Bakri. The goal is not to be these things. Now, to return to what Sheikh Sidi Muhammad Jamal said, okay, because this is all related. It looks like I've gone from Dan to Beersheba, but there's actually a purpose behind this, because I don't always think linearly. So now, he's asked, after I did that whole colloquy that I just did a moment ago, we return back to what was asked of him. What am I supposed to envision? He took one of the pictures he had off of his wall that had calligraphy on Allah's name, and he gave that person that, and he said, focus on this, the name of Allah. It had Allah Jalla Jalala. It had that on. He said, focus on this. That is the tasawwuf. That's the center. That's the centerpiece of what this dhikr is all about. Not your sheikh, no matter how august he is, no matter how big his amama is, even if he's tripping over his beard. That's not the centerpiece of the soul. The centerpiece is the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The centerpiece is his remembrance. The centerpiece is the salat and salam. The centerpiece is sending salat and salam upon the companions in the early generation. That is the centerpiece. And this is attested to by Dawood ibn Sulaiman al-Naqshbandi al-Ani, the big alim who died 1299 Hijri, his famous kitab Ashad al-Jihad, the big Hanbali sheikh from Iraq. After many of the Hanabila were killed in Baghdad by Salafis, he remained alive.
I wanted to clarify something. When you're talking about this whole thing that we're talking about, the Sheikh-centered turuq, we're not saying that they're all false, but since this is Sheikh-centered, anything can go wrong, and that's why you find so many of these Sheikh-centered turuq having run wrong.
Yes, this is precisely what you're finding, because they have a built-in flaw. They have a built-in flaw. And the hucksters and charlatans have seen this. The hucksters and charlatans have seen this. If you have a teacher that advises you of adhkar and awrad, and you can ask him questions and he advises you on things, the goal is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you have a sheikh or individual who says, you must read this wird of mine, you must envision me when you do your dhikr, and I must direct you in these particular exercises and so on. When you have this level of control, what background do you have that he falls back on? Because he's an independent entity in and of himself. He's not responsible to anyone. And that's not the case in this religion. People are responsible to other people. I come to you in the school of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, and I tell you something, say, but how come though? I'm responsible to people and a methodology that predates me, that antedates me. I have to call back to that. Oh yes, it's this. Oh, subhanallah. Right, yes, I'm responsible for this. I tell you categorically that yes, the wudu is nullified. Your wudu won't be valid if you have some najasa on your clothing and you make wudu. That's not true. I would have to establish that. Wait, hold on, where'd you get that from? I have to establish that. True enough, I can't make salah if that najasa is on the clothes. I might have changed my clothes. My wudu will still be valid though, because it's not a condition that my clothes are tahir for my wudu to be valid. Right? I have to establish these things. But people are they're not responsible for anything. So they kind of act as if they're these independent entities, and they can't be held under any, they can't be held to any account. So people treat you as if you're an atheist when you start asking, well, hold up, where did Shaykh al-Jilani do or say this? Since when did the students of Shaykh al-Jilani rahimahullah gather together and celebrate a banquet in his honor? Wait, hold on, what? When did this happen? Well, no. It's just a good thing to do. Did he say, I want you to do this after me?
Subhanallah.
No, did his students loved him way more than you'll never love him like his students did. That's impossible.
Subhanallah.
Because they carried his methodology to the ends of the earth as far as he could. We see what they established. If it was as you say, something like this would have occurred. And we can go all the way because they got to Nablus. Jami al-Hanbali is in Damascus. Jami al-Hanbali is in Nablus. The Jami al-Salahi, where Musa al-Qadumi used to teach and where Abdullah al-Qadumi used to teach, is there. The graveyard, the crypt where they are buried is there. His son Isa Sufyan al-Qadumi, there's a video of him talking about his father Musa through Abdul Karim. They're still there. They don't know what these people are talking about today. And we can see it. That's why we have questions. It's not because we hate the Tasawwuf and we don't love the Sufis. SubhanAllah, we're the ones that laid down the books for this methodology and systematized it. If anyone should be the ones looking after it, it should be us watching. That's why we have questions. And we have questions because the laity are being told, you must. Anytime you tell someone you must, there has to be something from the book or the sunnah or the consensus. There has to be something. You can't just tell people you must, and you put obligations on people that can't be justified or satisfied. These are common slaves of Allah that are bakers and tailors and knitters and sewers and doctors. You don't put burdens on them like this. Unless they're from the revealed law, it's irresponsible. It's also sinful to do this to them.
And it is also for this reason that we find grand Mujaddid scholars like Imam Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali that he destroyed all of those false Shaykh Center turuq, right?
Yes, he swept these turuq away. You had Abdullah Sufyan al-Qadumi rahimahullah sweeping them away. This is why what you find in Palestine today, the tariqah activity is very recent. It's extremely recent. Just like in North Africa, the things that we hear of today with men jumping or moving and things like this is 100, 150 years old. Because the turuq before had been swept away. You don't find turuq in Mauritania. You don't find it because they were swept away. It's not that they hadn't been there in the past. The muhaqqiqeen and muhtasibeen swept them away.
And is this also what the first Mahdi did as well?
Yes, they took all this stuff away. What had been there in the south of Egypt, it was swept away and established people on one set of principles. And I have, a Muslim brother has access to the written legacy of the Mahdi of the Sudan, the first Mahdi, alayhi salam, and he sent me the first book. I'm trying to get him to send me the rest of everything. It was mainly just advices. And when he sent it to me, it's called Ratib. This book's called Ratib, and it's your daily azkar. All it is the suwar that it's sunnah to recite every day. Waqi'ah, Mulk, Hamim, Alif Lam Mim. That's it. That's all it is. أنا أذكر لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير لا إله إلا الله ولا نعبد إلا إياه. What we say after the salah. And he advised us, make sure to say this after the salah. There's nothing in there to extol him, to extol his rank. He cut away all of the fat and left the meat.
We can probably say that some people now listening to this might be new to them, as I have received questions, people asking me, which tariqah must I follow? I mean, in the sense of thinking that it is wajib, like a madhahib.
Yes.
So, to a lot of people, now the thing that we're saying about the sheikhs and the turuq, to them, it's like, it is actually wajib to follow one, but in reality, it is actually a mubah, right? Permissible to follow them if they're sound.
This is permitted if they're sound.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing about it is, maintaining the four rings, as we discussed before, that's an obligation.
Right.
So it's an obligation to find someone that can assist you, someone or some people that can assist you in realizing this. But it needn't be the case that you resign your will or submit your volition to an organization, whether it's a group of people or a group of individuals or one individual, in order to realize this goal. That's not the case.
Mhm.
Because when we look in the first three generations, we did not find the bay'ahs that we find, the bay'atul ridwan. Yes, that was a bay'ah unto death
Mhm.
because they thought Uthman had been killed.
Oh.
Bay'ah upon entrance into Islam. Yes, I'm perfectly fine with that. So let's say a new believer comes to us.
Mhm.
He gives his hand to us, he says the Shahada, and he takes the bay'ah into Islam and the particular sins he was plagued with. We say, okay, we hereby accept your bay'ah that you will leave fornication, you will leave intoxicants, and you will leave murder.
Mhm.
And then after that, we immediately start working with him regarding his fiqh, his creed. That's not in dispute at all.
Right.
When ladies were coming to the Rasulullah and giving bay'ah by putting their hands in pools of water because he didn't shake hands with them, la usafihun nisa, and similar, I don't
Mhm.
shake hands with women, and similar things like this, which in these turuq today, people are touching women and doing
Right.
more than that. So when this happened, people were giving bay'ah on things that they were leaving upon their entrance into Islam.
Mhm. MashaAllah.
And so what was happening is when people were coming into Islam, they were being assigned a brother. The same thing happened when the Muhajirin, the 500 Sahaba immigrated from Mecca to Al-Madinah. They were assigned a brother. Why? Well, because the Muslims that had been in Mecca for 13 years, they were far more knowledgeable than the ones in Al-Madinah. So what happened is they were brothered up.
Oh.
So a Sahabi from Mecca was brothered up with a Sahabi from Al-Madinah.
MashaAllah.
And that's what happened. That's how they got to straddle that gulf in knowledge.
Mhm.
So yes, if somebody did that, I have no dispute in that at all.
Mhm.
If something was set up for the converts where there was a murshid system like that, I have no problem with that at all. But that's not what's being done. People are using this as a means of mind control, or as a means of leading people astray, or as a means of controlling people to where you forbid them from intermingling and mixing with other people, and they can't go with this person, can't go with that person.
Mhm.
And at the end of 5-10 years, they've learned nothing, they know nothing, and they have nothing.
SubhanAllah.
And this is irresponsible and despicable. That's not our methodology. That's not our goal. And this is one of the reasons why one of the past great mujaddids in this area, Sheikh Diyauddin Khalid al-Baghdadi, big alim,
SubhanAllah.
big imam of the Naqshbandiyya. His kutub he has amazing kutub,
Mhm.
right? He sought to remedy these matters. And when you look at his adhkar, glorifying and praising Allah, sending salat and salam upon his messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
Mhm.
and also sending blessings on the companions in the early generations.
Mhm.
There's no shame in that. And there's nothing in that anyone could have any contention with.
Mhm.
So you're on one accord.
Mhm.
Now, there might be a slight differences between, say, what he did and, say, maybe some of the other I read slight differences, but they're traceable to ahadith.
Mhm.
And the reason why someone prefers certain ahadith is, well, these ones were narrated through more channels than these,
Mhm.
or these ones have been handed down to us more voluminously than these, or these are easier on the slave to complete than these, because some adhkar are longer than other ones, right? That's the only real substantive difference that you'd have, because the goal is the same, to worship
Right.
Allah as if you see him,
Mhm.
and the stages that represents.
I want to ask you this. When we talk about these major shuyukh of the Sheikhs and turuq, like Imam Naqshbandi, like Imam Suhrawardi, now we know that they had this full methodology of the four circles. They had
Mhm,
them. Then they went on, they laid down this particular method, and a
mhm,
student or successor after successor came. But down the line, this method gets, well, an innovation creeps in, or a mistake is made,
yes.
and that's why we say in most cases we don't follow them. But can we actually still say that there are a few sound chains left, like a sound Shadili, a sound Naqshbandi chains?
Alhamdulillah. Well, we see examples of big scholars like Sheikh Mahmoud al-Sayyid from Duma and
Uh-huh.
other sheikhs who were carrying this mantle.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we can say that there are sound people today that are upon the way of the elders. It is not the case that all is extinguished and
Right.
gone. There are, but the issue is sometimes sometimes a matter is obscured by other matters. So we find today the people that call to the tawheed of themselves obscure the matter of fiqh and i'tiqad in these affairs. They've obscured it. In much the same way as there's some people who speak with a loud voice and call to the tasawwuf of themselves. And so they've obscured the people of righteousness, not because they're outshining them, but because the loud noise that they're making is a disruption to other slaves of Allah. But yes, there are no disputes between anyone about sound people of knowledge. The Khalwati are still in the earth. The Shadlis, you have Sheikh Mahmoud al-Sayyid, rahimahullah, was just a recent example of them. Sheikh Muhammad Jamil al-Shati, as well as Sheikh Muhammad Isam al-Shati, rahimahullah, who died very recently, was of the same methodology. There's no blame in this. So we have no doubt about this. The issue is dealing with, examining, understanding, and removing the innovations that have nothing to do with what our elders have declared. That is really the whole principle of all this.